Welcome to the Jersey Justice Podcast, featuring your hosts, attorneys Gerald Clark and Mark Morris.
Basically how it got started, we did it about a year and a half ago, and it was mostly, it was a Zoom thing, and I feel like humans, we didn't evolve on screens. You know what I mean? I love, so people know as being lawyers and stuff, after COVID, it's made our quality of life so much better in many ways because we don't have to schlep to courthouses every day, and all the time. And for someone like Allan, you practice nationally, and I know you had a private jet at one point, and you would get flown around in your jet to all these courthouses, which I want to ask you about. But anyway, I have this. So I think something's lost on Zoom, and there's something about I can't stand social media. I feel so bad for these kids that are constantly on their phones. I see people at baseball games, everyone's on their phone, and you're like living your life in a freaking phone. And you're going to grow up and all your memories are going to be cell phone memories. It just doesn't make any sense. And the addiction of it. You talk about groundbreaking litigation, and when 3 Mile Island happened, and how are we going to deal with this? And you amalgamated your knowledge of torts and environment and procedure and administrative law and kind of to a social justice end. And when you came to us, when we talked about Cooper Tire, I would talk to my colleague and be like, "What is he talking about?" I'm like, that case is, I don't see it, because we're a contingency practice, and you're, as I understand, largely a contingency practice, meaning we don't get paid unless we unless we win the case. And so we have to always, anytime a case walks in the door, as contingency lawyers, we have to critically look at the case and make sure that there's a likelihood of succeeding. Otherwise, we can lose our shirts. It's much like being a real estate agent. You're not going to get paid until you sell the house. So if you're spending all your time and effort showing houses that never sell, it can be a problem. So I remember when you brought in this Cooper Tire case and we were thinking about it, I was really skeptical. I'm like, I don't see this case at all. But so much social change, because I was being a little facetious when I asked you, why do we need the EPA or why do we need environmental lawyers like you when we have the Environmental Protection Agency? But a lot of social justice is done by lawyers. So if you take the concussion litigation, with the NFL concussions and the hockey players, and how that change didn't happen, it happened because of contingency lawyers and plaintiffs lawyers, not because Congress got around to, mandating taking players out when they suffer a concussion so they don't have these life-altering CTE injuries. But the next one is the social media. I just like, in the 60s or whatever, all these rock stars died because they didn't know drugs, they didn't realize it, and then now we know about drugs and cigarettes. And the next thing that I think is really damaging especially to the kids, and it's like a national addiction, is the cell phones. So anyway, that's a long way. I'm throwing a lot out here.
And actually, I noticed some of those. I'm not involved, but some of those cases are now starting to get into the courts. And I think going back to your point earlier about the EPA, look, in America we have public law and private law. Public law very often balances costs and benefits, or First Amendment and this, and it's all about balancing and governing, which is usually some medium.
Is it
the
really?
Private law, though, is your one opportunity to get justice for people, and it's great. Like, I would much rather talk to 12 people on a jury than to talk to an administrative agency. Like when I started doing anti-nuke work, the big fight was always in the regulatory space for, could you charge people more for electricity to build a nuke plant or not? And then you'd have to fight it. And I remember, I had this great case. I thought I was going to win. It was an administrative hearing, and there was like this big firm on the other side. They had like 16 lawyers back when everybody was wearing three-piece suits, and being a little overweight. And I went through this thing, and I had a paralegal who was really an anti-nuker, and I said, I think we did pretty well. Like the judge was going to come out and rule. And she goes, nah, you just wait. So the big fat guy on the other side, large human being on the other side, stands up and he's like, Your Honor, I'd like to move to reopen the record, for another 6-week hearing.
And wait, this is a hearing you had or a motion?
No, it was a hearing in front of the PUC in Pennsylvania, Public Utility. They set rates.
Got it.
And
they want to charge the customers to build a nuke plant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I said we're against it because it's a waste of money. Is basically all you could really argue. And I had brought in all these guys about how things could go wrong and the costs and more affordable energy thing. And the guy on the other side gets up and he's like, I'd like to move to reopen the record for 6 weeks of testimony. And, I'm like...
How long had the hearing taken place that for?
Oh, it had dragged like 3 months at that point.
Okay.
I mean, it was like, I was like, I needed for it to be over so I could go make some money, It was pretty bad.
Yeah.
I was like a hostage situation.
Yeah.
And just as I'm about to get up and give my big speech, this girl leans over and she says, you realize the judge gets paid by the day.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I had thought about that. I thought he was a real judge.
It's an administrative judge. Wow.
It was terrible. She just, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to lose. So, I just got up and said, well, we object. This is, if they can't figure out how to make a record, I can't help them and you can't help them. And he's like, I'll grant the motion.
Oh, God.
It was terrible.
So what happened?
We lost.
Yeah.
You gotta, you think, I've never been in a case where I didn't think there was except for the beginning of that Nuclear Regulatory Commission where I told the client, but usually if I can think through the whole thing, I feel like I can win the case. And I don't take a case unless I can win it, like with the Cooper Tire thing.
Yeah.
Even though a lot of other people don't see it that way. But I'll tell you, private, that was...
So how were you getting paid on that? Was that a pro bono thing? Or?
Oh, man, this is painful. Yeah. They would have bake sales for me every weekend, and they would bring me, like, change in a bag and broken cookies.
This is the community.
Yeah.
And so why did you do the case? Were you thinking you were going to make money on it?
No. I just thought it was the right thing to do. I'm a lawyer. I got, and I also, I think when you crave experience, you think you can solve
And they would have
problems.
bake sales and give you like bags of change and stuff from bake sales.
Yeah, I almost developed diabetes because, you get change and you get like your cupcakes and broken cookies and and then you like go home and that's dinner, right?
Yeah.
Which I don't, I really nowadays I stay away from sugar. Put it like that. It was bad. But that was the day I vowed that I was never going to do another administrative hearing.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
That just give me a jury.
Yes.
And jurors, it's the great thing about our democracy that people really don't understand is that the people who founded this country thought that certain important decisions were not for the president, not for Congress, not for the states, but for a jury.
Right.
And that juries could sit there and they don't have to do like the EPA cost benefit analysis. They can just say that chemical was knowingly sold or distributed, that it caused cancer. This person's in court. They have cancer. Liability, causation, damages, and they get to decide. And the beauty of juries in this day and age, they can't be lobbied in the same way that it's not just Congress that gets lobbied. But I think what a lot of people don't understand is these federal agencies get lobbied. I mean, I've been doing some of this PFAS litigation, the forever chemical, right? And
just so people know, so there's these chemicals that are used in industry and they get into the groundwater and they like never break down.
Right.
Is that basically what it is?
Yeah, people may know about the Teflon pans or the Gore-Tex. I mean, it's used in a lot of products, stickums, plastic bags sometimes have them. So we were looking at some documents which are unsealed. They were all produced under seal. A lot of it's like you can't tell anybody about it, but the judge, in his opinion, wrote about these. In other words, the lobbyists would talk to the company about how they could lobby the EPA to not do anything.
Right.
And how they were shocked that they had such a good meeting where the EPA agreed to put off regulating this chemical. And this is like the lobbyist and the corporation that knows this causes cancer. And meanwhile, the EPA, but doesn't do anything about it. Now you bring that case to trial in front of a jury.
Oh, yeah.
Does the EPA say, "Oh, we're mad at how you treated us"? No, they just move on to the next case. But the jurors will sit there, focus on it, and get the job done, which is good. It's funny. It's like when I was in law school, I didn't really appreciate juries. I mean, Harvard's not the kind of place where you talk about trials and stuff like that, But, it wasn't then. I think maybe it's changed a lot as people realize that if you want to affect social change, you got to be able to know how to go to court and put a case on. But actually, the sealing. So for your listeners, routinely, defendants or people who have done really bad things want to seal all the records.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, ooh.
And it's
against that.
It's very terrible. But actually, it last year it inured to my benefit for the first time. So I've been doing this PFAS litigation, so I know all the hot smoking documents.
Yeah.
And I get a call. Belgium, the Flemish government. Belgium has 3 states. The Flemish, North, Brussels, where actually a lot of the EU stuff is, and then the French part. It's one of the few countries that's half French and half Flemish, like 2 different groups. But so the Minister for the Environment and Justice wants to hire us. Like, why? Well, she knows that you guys know about the hot documents. Because in Europe, you don't get to take discovery of the other side. I mean, one of the things, that I did enjoy during the Zomax era was finding those hot documents, finding the whistleblowers and all of that. And there's a certain thrill to putting that together. But, she was smart enough to realize that in Europe, the bad guys who were sitting on all their knowledge under seal had the advantage in negotiations. But the moment I sit down in the room across from American lawyers, they ended up paying around $500 million plus to the government for a manufacturing facility, very bad, with just terrible pollution. And one of the great things about that case was that they understood that, and your viewers may not realize now there's this sort of cross-pollination going on between America and Europe. A lot of American lawyers, myself included, are doing more work in Europe. European ideas, on the other hand, are influencing us here. For example, in climate change litigation, most of the cases in the U.S. have lost. But in Europe, they're all winning. Why? Because the Europeans say it's a fundamental human right. So Americans are starting to say we've got to amend our state constitutions to make the right to a healthful environment essential. So,
how is it that there's a good percentage of people that think climate change is a hoax? How is that? I mean, when you and I first met, in the early 2000s, it's a completely different world today.
no cell phones.
How exactly? And how is it that we can have these leaders that, I mean, science. Let's not believe science. The election was rigged. It was a fake election, even though 65 federal judges said no. The voting machines are rigged by the Venezuelan government, and then Fox News ends up paying $500 million against Smartmatic for that lie. But if you poll people, probably 35% of the country will believe that the Smartmatic machines are rigged. And what is it, like 60% of Republicans believe the last presidential, and on the same line, people think a good percent will say that climate change is a hoax, despite the empirical studies and science. Like, for someone with your experience, and that stuff baffles me. I can't understand it.
I will say this to somebody who used to work for Bob Dole. Yeah, I remember things.
Listen, Allan, you and I know those are two completely different parties. The
Right.
one today
No.
and the Bob Dole party.
That's the point, though.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, Republicans, Democrats, people who I think historically would grapple for good solutions with some ideological differences, strong on, more money for military, more money for welfare, whatever.
Yeah.
But now what's happened is, I think I mentioned to you, I was trying a case in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And I was picking a jury. This was about, 2014, 2015.
Yeah.
Ended up winning, but it was an antitrust case. And, it's all about market power. So expert testimony by economists are very important. We had an economist, they had an economist. And so I was asking them in jury selection, what do you think about experts? And they're like, oh, no.
Now, jury selection is where they bring in a bunch of citizens, maybe 50 or 100 people, and the lawyers on both sides before the trial starts get to interview those people to see if they would be good jurors or not.
Right.
That's jury selection.
Yeah, usually the judge does a bunch of it, and then the lawyers take some time, and then the judge gets a little antsy if you drag it out too long. But yeah, it's important, and it gives you, the lawyer, on both sides, an opportunity to sort of think about who these people are, and
might they be predisposed favorably or not to your case, and then you can decide to pick them or not.
Yeah, and I'm always the visiting team, so I'm trying the case. Very often
you're the visit again. I don't mean to do this, but you're the visiting team because your office is in New Orleans. You have a national practice, and you handle cases throughout the country, in Oklahoma, New York, wherever it pops up.
Yeah, except for the BP oil spill, I don't think I've been in court in New Orleans for 15, 20 years.
And if anyone's seen the movie My Cousin Vinny, you understand what it means to be the visiting team in court, where you had Herman Munster as the judge, and you have, what was his name? Joe Pesci's the lawyer from New York, and then Joe Pesci wasn't getting a fair shake down there because he was the quote visiting team.
Right.
And that's a real
example. So when you're
that.
the visiting team, you like the opportunity to sort of talk to some locals and all, and get a feel for. And usually I'll try to go to wherever the trial is, a couple of times before the trial, and just get to know people and sort of understand, what's what. But one of the reason I bring it up here is that what was shocking was, so I said, well, so what do you think about experts? And somebody most people are just like, oh, don't call on me, raise their hand. Like, I think these experts are all, stupid. They don't know. They just call themselves experts. And it kind of dominant, it's kind of like spiraling. Like, a lot of people were jumping in about how they hate experts. And I said, well, what about experts from Washington, D.C.? Oh, they're the worst. And what about lobbyists? It's like, yeah, they're like lobbyists, And I said, what do you think about lobbyists? They said, we hate lobbyists, It's like, ah. And I realized at that point, like, I think it was a couple of years later when Trump was running for president, and I thought he had some issues with telling the truth and all, but when he ran against Hillary Clinton, he was like, she's the insider. The whole establishment is rigged. you and I know that's a bad thing and you should support me. But I realized that what made something like that possible was the collapse of experts. Like 40 years ago, you go into court and there's a doctor on the stand, or he puts on his white coat or something, you're dead. I mean, they're going to just believe the experts, right? They're just going to believe the experts, and that's how it was. Now they just assume the experts are hired guns who are, if you bring an expert to trial, it's a problem. And so I ended up changing my trial strategy there, and I called as of cross. The senior vice president was the corporate rep. First witness out of the box. Very dangerous because these guys get coached on, things. And I just said, how much? The case involved the machines for, you hook your TV up to it, the VHS.
It's the cable. It was antitrust.
Right. It was an antitrust cable.
And the cable companies have a monopoly over those boxes that are probably cost them $5 and they charge you $20 a month for them.
Right. But also, if you take a picture of like a cable box from 1970 and 2014, it's the same.
Because there's no competition.
Right. But you look at a phone from 1970 and a phone from today.
Yeah.
You know that something's not right.
And so your case, you're suing the cable companies on behalf of the consumers for the cost of the box.
And one of their defenses was, well, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, hasn't complained about all this. And if anything, they've sort of seemed to like it. And so my first question was, because they just heard opening, so I go first and the defense lawyer goes second. And he had said, look, the FCC is... So first question, I said, okay, you recall your lawyer was just talking about the FCC? He's like, yes. I said, how much does your company spend lobbying the FCC every year? And the guy said something like $300 million. And then...
Well, wait a minute. Did you know the answer to that question already?
No. Well, I sort of had... we had done some quick research.
Did you have anything to cross him on if he said not much, or I don't know, or I don't remember?
I had some numbers.
And does it even matter because you just planted in the jury's mind anyway?
Well, no. I thought... I talked to him in the hall, like, you're in a courthouse, you eat at the cafeteria, whatever. And he seemed like, not a liar to me. He struck me as somebody, he said, yeah, $300 million.
Did they object to the question?
Oh, yeah.
Did you have a sidebar or?
No, the judge was like.
You just let it go?
Yeah. Like, they put the FCC in issue.
Right.
In their opening. I mean.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I just said, well, how much you spend on lobbying? And I did know the number was like around 300 million. So he said 300 million. And then I thought, just move on. Like, don't beat it or anything. Everybody in the jury is looking at him like $300 million. And that's your best witness?
And the first question.
Right. And so I was going to move on. And so he says, well, that's not so much. And I'm like, he's going to dig a hole. He's going to dig a hole. I can't believe he's going to dig a hole. He says,
now, is that the point where you're walking back to the counsel table to get your next question, and then he says with your back turned to him, that's not that much, and then you turn back around?
Yeah.
One of those moments?
Yeah. So he's like, I'm a little flabbergasted, but thinking, this is pretty good, but, it's like quit while you're ahead. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
that's what the law book would tell you.
Right.
Don't ask the next question.
And so I just look at him. People hate when you just look at them. They have to say something. They can't just be silent. And he says, well, the industry as a whole spends over $2 billion. So really it's like less than 10% of what the industry contributes. I said, wait, just so the jury understands. So your competitors, the other companies, are also giving the FCC money or lobbying the FCC while you're lobbying it. Yes. And you know about this. Yes. And they're doing it 10 times more than you. Yes. So we could all agree that's a lot of lobbying of the FCC, right? Yeah. And obviously you wouldn't spend that kind of money unless you thought you were going to get some kind of positive result. And these other companies who are also spending over, now it was 280 billion, some crazy number, wouldn't be spending this money unless you thought it was efficacious, would they? No. Okay. I think I'm going to turn around again and see if something good happens.
yeah.
But so you know, that's when you know times are changing. You know, people are. I don't fully have a theory as to how the internet and instant access to information has changed Americans so that they no longer respect experts or anything. People do their own research. You know, you see these rants sometimes on social media where people have sort of constructed these arguments in a very, you know, they're not professional scientists or anything like this. I, by the way, knew Bobby Kennedy when he was younger. I mean, I'm kind of shocked by what's happened to him. I don't know.
In the last few months, we're talking about, right? I mean, he went from to now endorsing.
No, did he put like the dead bear in the park, Central Park?
Yeah, but that was like 20 years ago.
Oh well, still that's kind of whacked. But
I don't think that story's that crazy.
So if you were a judge, you'd be easy on sentencing. Well, that's 20 years ago. But this recent stuff, that's really tickling. Okay, so I'll tell you my favorite expert story.
He picked the dog. The bear was roadkill. I guess he picked it up to have a taxiderm and to make a rug, but he forgot it was in the trunk of his car and had to jump on a plane, so he dumped it in the park. What's crazy about that? I don't see that. I don't see that as that crazy of a story.
I think that with my limited lifespan, I'm not going to engage on that topic any further.
Yeah,
but I will tell you I'll tell you my favorite expert story. So this was I was doing an auto. Actually, the 3 Mile Island judge had asked me to take a pro se case. So a pro se case is somebody files their own lawsuit, and actually, they'd filed with like 9 different law firms. The family was a little crazy, I guess, and they had the judge wanted it off her docket. She said, "Would you try this case? It's a toxic tort case." The guy had been an auto spray painter, and presumably the toluene or other chemicals that came off of the paint were inhaled and caused neurological damage. So because this was a judge who I'd been very successful for in another case, you know, do it. Other judges will know that you're a stand-up guy. You probably aren't going to make any money on the case, right? But, you know, lawyers, sometimes you just do things because it helps the system work better. So expert discovery was closed, right? And I did meet the client.
Meaning you picked up the case, the guy didn't really have a lawyer, and you couldn't.
They've had 9 lawyers.
9, okay.
Before me, but they didn't have a lawyer. And
did they have an expert at that point?
There was one expert
that he got. Okay.
That one of the lawyers had gotten, and so this is a toxicology trial, really. Yeah. It's the study of poisons in the human body. The expert they had testified and been qualified as an expert over 200 times. However, they were all drunk driving cases, okay? And I was like, this is not going to go well at all, you know? And they had all these world-class experts, you know, and I remember I go to meet this expert, and he's standing there. I guess we met for lunch about a day before the trial or something. And he's doing this with his pen. I don't know if you can see it, just like, and, you know, and he's kind of staring at the pen. And I'm talking to him and trying to figure out, like, does he even know what toluene is, you know, or anything like that? You know, he's great on alcohol.
Yeah.
And so I was like trying to work a script up, like, oh, the body has different organs. Certain chemicals affect different organs differently, you know, like alcohol in the brain and the liver, but not your blood, whatever. And I'm watching him do this. And I'm like, it's one of those pens with the naked girl. I mean, she starts out with the bathing suit, but you flip it over. Yeah. And he has like a plastic pocket protector with like 9 pens here. And I ask him if I can see the pen, and he shows me, and I'm like, I said, those other pens, are they exactly the same? He's like, yeah. I said, don't bring those to court, okay? Yeah. Let's just not do that. And of course, we get to court, and he's got his suit, he's all buttoned up, and it was, I know, so there was opening statement. This was near Harrisburg, with where Allan was, but it was pretty rural. A lot of jurors were not city people or anything like that. Yeah. Which is like South Jersey, and I felt very comfortable and all. And there were like 9 defendants because there was different paints that were used, and DuPont was one of them. And so, realizing I don't have a big case, you never want to say anything that you can be impeached on by the jury. Like, you never want to say, I'm going to prove this if you can't absolutely prove it.
Right.
So I said, my guy went to high school here in town, served in the Marines, came back, was an auto spray painter. A lot of these chemicals in the paint are bad, cause neurological damage, and we'll put all that in front of you soon. Goodbye. I sat down, like really a 5-minute opening, because I didn't know what the hell was going to happen. His wife was crazy. He was in bad shape, okay, yeah. But his wife was nuts, and like she showed up in court in go-go boots, which doesn't really make the best impression on jurors or a woman judge. So in any event, I get up there and lowball it. His first lawyer up is DuPont. He's like, this guy's a faker, and it just like mean, spitting nails, like every communist. He was, he was there with, everything. It's like the worst thing in the world. And I thought, you know what? Some of that's true, but he's overstated it. I can work with this. I can work with this. Yeah. And then but then magic happens, which often is the case in court, right? So the next 8 guys get up and say, "Oh, we feel really bad for the plaintiff. It's terrible what he's experiencing, but it wasn't our product that had anything to do with this." Yeah. And so suddenly they're all like pointing fingers at DuPont without saying it's DuPont's fault. Oh, we feel terrible. This is a tragedy that never should have happened, But and like I keep, now at this point, I don't really care about what they're saying, just as long as they all say it, except for this guy. Right? And who's like put himself in a box. And it was good. And then the judge, after opening, usually the judge will say, okay, let's all take a break, come back in 15 minutes. So I got in the hall to the other guys who aren't DuPont. And I said, can we work something out here? I was like,
Meaning try to settle the case.
Yeah. Yeah. And suddenly, like the week before, I called every lawyer, like, offer me anything and I'll take it back to the client. Yeah. It's just like, I couldn't get 10,000 out of anybody. All right. Wow. And, cause it was a weak, sort of a weak case because they had the wrong expert. But I mean, toluene does cause neurological damage, and he was in a room that was full of paint for like, 3 or 4 years, and, so in any event, the judge has us come back in. I said, Judge, could we have like another 15 minutes? I said, I think we're making a little progress with some of the defendants here. And she goes like, how much have you got? To me. She calls me up sidebar. She says, how much have you got? I said, I got $500,000 from 7 of these guys. And she goes, take it. I said, no.
I thought you couldn't get 10,000 now.
I couldn't, but they all saw, but for, I guess my great opening. Oh, okay. And they just decided that they wanted out. Right. Voir dire had gone very well for me. I picked a good jury, and I got to tell a lot of my story because she was like kind of she was a federal judge, but she'd been a state judge. So, state
Yeah.
judges will give you more latitude. So I had a great jury selection process. And so they have $500,000. I said, please don't repeat that. I said, I think I can get closer to $1 million or something.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so then it's an hour and the jury's still sitting there, and it's like, the client, I tell the client, had stars in their eyes, and I just said, look, these are just 7 people. We still have DuPont. Let me settle these out, at least get you some money per in, and at least my time is going to get paid for.
So who are these other defendants? Like just distributors, things like that?
No, paint companies. Like, this was...
Oh, because it's different. He was exposed to different paints, not just from DuPont.
It's like a car paint place. Like, for example, if you have this is old knowledge, but if you had a Mercedes, that would be a isocyanates-based paint.
Got it.
So there was the paint guy for the Mercedes. Then the toluene was used. The DuPont product was used on a lot of American cars.
Got it.
So they were smaller defendants.
Got it.
And for whatever reason, they all decided, and they all had lawyers watching, I think we got like 750 something, and she was so happy, this judge. She was just like so happy. And I was. And the client was happy too, because that was a sure thing.
Yeah.
And you still had DuPont.
Yep.
And DuPont by volume was most of the stuff. And, I had my expert ready to go. And so then the judge calls the jury back in, says, we've had a settlement. These 7 companies are all excused. We thank them for being here. Now, she said, we have a settlement.
Yeah.
Now let's resume. And the DuPont guy jumps up, is like, oh, Judge, I'll be prejudiced now. Yeah. And she calls us up the sidebar. She goes, you gave that stupid opening statement. You're going to have to live with it. And your client's going to have to live with it.
Yeah, that he's a big faker and they just paid all this money to have him go away. Yeah.
So I put my guy on the stand. I didn't really have a lot to work with. I had him and the client's wife in the go-go boots. And my client was like, really, he couldn't testify. He was there in a wheelchair and it was bad. And so he's sitting there, and I ask him a softball question. You have a PhD? Yes. What's your field? Toxicology? Yes. And is it true that over 200 courts have recognized you as an expert witness? Yes. This was back when that meant something. Okay.
This is your expert, the DWI guy.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So he's sitting there, and then I start saying now, the DuPont product is manufactured. It contains these chemicals, right? Toluene, this. He's like, yes. I said, which of those are poisons? And he goes through them, and he's like, and I said, what is a poison? And he said, he says, well, actually, if you look at the Latin of toxicology, it's a study of poisons. And, so that was all like pretty good. I was like, it was happening. And I said, now, are there certain parts of the body that are more vulnerable to some of these poisons than others? Yes. Would you explain to the jury? Yeah. So he starts talking about toluene, neurological. And, I ask another question, and then he unbuttons his coat. He's got the plastic pocket protector with the 10 pens. And he pulls out, I guess, his favorite, Betty Lou or somebody.
Yeah. Betty Boop, yeah.
And he starts doing this. And, part of you sees red, like I am going to dive across the courtroom, beat the shit out of you, and not worry about anything else after that. But I held my tongue, and he's doing.
He's just trying to mess with you, actually.
No, he wasn't messing with me. He was an addict, I think. There was something he needed to do. Some people have cigarettes. He had his stripper pen.
Yeah.
So he does it, and so I quickly wrap up. I mean, it's maybe 35-minute direct, And And the other guy jumps up. He's bitter now. He's bitter. He's having to try this case, and he's got Mr. DWI, and all I could think about was he's going to notice the pens and tell the jury this guy's like a porno freak.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really porn. It's just like a pen, but still, it's like kind of weird shit. And this guy it was the worst cross-examination I ever saw in my life. I mean, that he couldn't break this. So he's like, well, so I see you've testified in a lot of DWI cases. Yes. And my guy just like says, those are toxicology cases just like this one, but he's like holding his pen, and he pushes the guy back on like, come on, DWI cases, are you kidding me? And he's like, oh, I've read books about all these chemicals, didn't ask him which book or didn't have a learned treatise because he thought this guy was such a joke. He had nothing to impeach him with he just thought the jury would hear, 200 drunk driving cases. This has nothing to do with drunk driving. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or one of the guys I settled with was like, that was his witness, but they left. They took their files with them.
Yeah.
So it actually looked really good. And so she excuses the jury. And I'm thinking, like, there is a divine and merciful God that I've gotten this far in this case, you know? And the judge, like, calls the guy over, and she's like, what are you thinking? She said, that was the worst cross-examination I ever saw. And she's like, you're going to have to pay. Bring somebody from headquarters tomorrow. First thing. I'm dismissing the jury for the day. The next morning, like, somebody from DuPont, with a briefcase. It's always a good sign when they have a briefcase because there's cash in there. And so the guy had one of those, like, remember those metal sort of briefcases that were like all silver and stuff that they used to use? So anyhow, he came, and she just beat on this guy like a redheaded stepchild, and he finally paid twice what the other guys had paid just to get out of this because, I guess somebody figured out that it could go really badly for them. Yeah. But that was probably my favorite expert witness. This is just a regular pen.
Yeah.
Okay? No secrets, compartments, or anything like that. Wow. It was bad. Actually, the weirdest part of that was the client wanted cash. So I said, well, go to the bank and they'll give you cash,
Like you didn't want to write him a settlement check out of your trust account. You wanted actual cash. Yeah.
Right, which, you start worrying about, but, I had to call the Bar Association and everything. Yeah. Like the Go-Go Boots and the mother had the cash, and we had to take a policeman to the bank. We told the bank how much cash they would need. Yeah. Like, apparently banks don't have that much cash there. And they put these two old kind of plastic suitcases that sort of looked like were going to fall apart, threw it in the back seat of their car, and drove off. I was glad to be done with that case. And the next time I saw the judge, I told her she still owed me really big time for this.
That's a crazy one.
But I mean, but the world on experts has just changed so much. Like, this guy, he had a PhD. Okay, this is toxicology. Who knows about toxicology? Fine. Only guy they heard from. But in Oklahoma, like 20 years later, or 25 years later, nobody even cares about experts. They don't believe in expertise, and that's why whenever I think the liberals start saying something about Trump, people assume that you're making up facts like they make up facts, and that it's not really true. I mean, I don't understand, with all the criminal stuff. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when, a divorce would destroy a political career, let alone, conviction for raping a woman in a department store. I mean,
I can't understand it. I think a lot of it has to do with the Citizens United opinion and the unlimited money in politics. So people are getting screwed. They've just been getting screwed. All the wealth is concentrated in such a small percentage, and they just want to burn the whole thing down. And they're just not believing any of it anymore.
Right. I mean, people a lot of people are sitting there saying, "Well, I'm not going to vote for Harris because, price of food has gone up like 5 or 10%," and they're ignoring the fact that the billionaire class has gone up like 100-fold, in these last couple of years, and they're not willing to say the system is broken in that sense. I agree with you. I think the worst decision of my lifetime, and it's, even worse than the Voting Rights Act cases, was Citizen United, where just unlimited flood of money in politics these fake news outlets, it's bad. And, it's a problem. But we as trial lawyers have to take the world the way it is and try to get the best result for our clients, which means that if instead of saying my expert's better than their expert, I say, this was a rigged deal from the get-go in closing. How many billions of dollars are getting spent lobbying this agency for this tying arrangement? Yeah. And okay, it's a different argument than the one I might have made, 20, 30 years ago, but at least I'm listening to the jurors and trying to try to get it in a way that the appeals court will affirm the jury. But, personally, I think it's sad. Some of these changes I think are sad, but I also feel like it's a challenge to figure out how to frame the story. Yeah. And that's what we do at law is ultimately, you talk about all these big cases, but ultimately we're just storytellers. We have to tell a story. Yeah. And the kind of story we tell has evolved over time and will continue to evolve. And we have to be willing to listen to it. I mean, one of the reasons I love trying cases against these high-rise lawyers, lawyers in the big firms and the skyscrapers of Manhattan, is that they don't know anything about storytelling. They don't talk to any normal people. They all sit in conference rooms and decide internally what makes the most sense. And they'll come out and they'll say, they'll say the darndest things. And you're like, that's your best defense? Yeah. That's your argument, Great.
So I spend a lot of time in Puerto Rico, and there's a lot of...
love Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
I tried 3 cases there.
Yeah, there's a lot of gentrification going on in Puerto Rico, I guess, after Hurricane Maria, and they passed different laws. There's an Act 60 law there where if you qualify, you basically pay no federal income tax because Puerto Rico is a territory, and if you're a citizen of Puerto Rico, they've structured this to incentivize people to come in.
I know a lot of lawyers have done that just to shield income, I think, taxes.
So there's a lot of kind of backlash about that and gentrification, with a lot of the cost of living, the homes are going up because a lot of people are moving in. So how do you've tried cases in Puerto Rico, that's surprising to me in that being successful in that environment. Being the visiting team, how did that work out in those cases in Puerto Rico? You know what I mean? How do you, first of all, the jurors all speak Spanish. It was federal court in Puerto Rico?
In federal court in Puerto Rico, you have to have some English skills to serve on a jury. And the proceedings are in English, though a lot of cursing and under-the-breath stuff goes on in Spanish.
Right. So weren't you concerned that, I'm going to get looked at as an outsider here and not going to win this case?
Okay. All right. You asked for it. You got it. No. I'm supremely self-confident, maybe to the point that I'm not always the most perceptive about myself and how others see me. But I had a racketeering trial there, civil racketeering trial. And which I ultimately won and got a $144 million verdict from a Puerto Rican jury. And before the trial, I'd really worked hard on this case. I mean, it was a lot of documents. And then, like, 2 weeks before the trial was to start, after all the exhibits were marked and all the motions in limine, the pretrial motions were done, it was just like 2 weeks to trial. They dumped like another 250,000 documents on us, which were multiple page documents and millions of pages. So the judge was pretty ticked off. I was ticked off, and it was, but in that, so the judge said, I'm going to give you another 2 weeks, Mr. Cantor. We're going to try this case, and he sanctioned the other side. And so I like to do focus groups. Now, some of your listeners may not know about focus groups, but it's basically you get a group of people who would be not unlike your jury, and usually you get a specialist who knows how to ask questions. But you can ask questions also. Say, I want to know how they feel about this, how do they feel about that. And I've done focus groups myself, and usually gotten really good results with them. Any event, so during that 2 week period, the local firm, Puerto Rican firm, father and two sons, so they say to me, we should do opening because they're not going to like you.
These are your co-counsel.
Yeah, people who I've been 2.5 years. I do all the work, put up all the funding of the case, and at the last minute they want to try the case, or they want to do opening and closing, and I can do the witnesses.
Right.
And I'm like, no.
So that they're more the face of the to the jury of your
right.
side.
They're saying, look, you don't understand in Puerto Rico. You know, it's like they're going to see you as like from the mainland. They're not going to like you.
Like a gringo. You're a gringo.
Yeah, yeah. And so I say to the woman who's doing the focus group, I said, look, at the end, ask about me. They haven't met me, but just, you know. So go through the focus group. It's very good. I mean, I learned a lot. And then at the end, says, how do you feel? She goes, how do you feel about lawyers from Puerto Rico versus lawyers from the states of the United States? And the jurors, you know, they raise their hand. You know, the fake jurors raise their hand, and they're like, oh, lawyers from the mainland are much better than Puerto Rican lawyers. Puerto Rican lawyers are all corrupt.
Yeah.
It goes on and on. You know, like everybody's got a story about a bad Puerto Rican lawyer.
That screwed them in some way.
And we're like behind a one-way glass, and my distinguished co-counsel are sitting next to me as this like deluge is coming down on them. Yeah. And so I say, so then she says, so they said, well, if you had a problem, would you want to get a lawyer from the States or from Puerto Rico? Oh, definitely the States. Definitely the States. And then like somebody raises their hand and says, and I like one of those Jewish lawyers from the States. Yeah. I'm Jewish. Yeah. And it's like, okay, we don't have to have that discussion ever again.
It's wild. So I remember one of the big things when we'd be in court back in the early 2000s, and I think the defense lawyers used to, every once in a while, they would be like, and he's got a jet, you know, he's got his own plane. How'd that all come about? Like, you know, what's the deal with Allan Cantor and his jet?
Well, I don't have a jet now.
Yeah.
As you pointed out correctly earlier, you know, post-COVID, judges don't expect you to travel. You know, they're like, let's just Zoom it, which is great because you say you save the time of getting to the courtroom. The worst part of pre-Zoom was getting to the courtroom and having to wait all morning for your case to be called. I mean, that was like, that's another 3 hours of your life you'll never get back.
Yeah.
And now judges are using technology more, and I think that's a good thing. But back then, it was, I had a national practice, and, you know, I did for years, you know, fly commercial and, the wear, the tear, the time, how many times did they cancel the last flight in the Miami airport, and you have to spend, stay an extra day and this and that. And it wasn't like once or twice a year. I mean, I was literally on the road all the time.
Yeah.
And my wife got pregnant with my first kid. And I thought that rather than leaving my kid money when I died, I'd give my kid the gift of time and be there more. And I bought my first plane when she was pregnant with my first son, and I am glad I made that choice. Maybe other people would make different choices, but for me, and honestly, like take Cooper Tire, which was a landmark case. In 5 days, I was in 7 different courts, okay, because of that jet. And I don't think it would have been possible otherwise, because what we had done was in that case, strategically, we had filed state court cases all over the U.S. And
can you talk about that a little bit? Because that always fascinated me too. You're basically a small firm in New Orleans. It was you, it was Cindy Green, Conley, and I forget the other attorneys. But I think at the time you were doing Cooper Tire, it was you and maybe 3 other lawyers in the office, only one of which was working on Cooper Tire. But you filed, I think, 26 lawsuits in several different states. There was state court, federal court. Can you talk a little bit about how you structured that, how you managed that? I mean, lawyers, a lot of lawyers, there's a lot of ego floating around that group. And, I think of, when George Bush put together the coalition for the first Iraq war. Like, can you talk a little bit about the structure and how you did that, how you managed that, and then how that translated to what you had to do each day to get around before Zoom?
Sure. So we.
I mean, it's fascinating. It wasn't one lawsuit.
Once I had a strategy in mind. So these are basically state court cases, state products liability law. It was the problem started with like bad tires, and they would come off the production line so bad that, among other things, they had a guy. His job was to take an awl, pointy object, and pop the bubbles inside. Yeah. But if you got bubbles, it means it's not stable. It won't adhere, and it could, you could have an accident. Yeah. A number of people have died with these tires.
If I recall, when they're puncturing the tire to an extent which allows moisture to get in, which then rusts the steel belt in the tire, which can cause a catastrophic failure of the tire at a high speed and kill a family of rollovers and stuff.
Right. And there had been a few death cases, and I was talking to one lawyer about it, and then I realized that I looked for the stuff that had been in the public record about Cooper Tire, and I did some research, and I realized, okay, this is a scam. And then I thought, strategically, what do you have to do? Well, the lazy approach would have been file a national class action, right? But then you got the law of 50 different states, and the judge, that becomes a reason not to. Also, in federal court, you often end up in something called a multi-district litigation, so they throw everybody together and nothing moves. And I think most lawyers will tell you, you gotta move your case, And I figured, okay, state court, in theory, each of the state judges should be willing to each of the state judges will have a shorter timeline to either throwing your case out or letting you try your case.
Right.
And so I filed in all these states. I thought good partners in each of these states, like you and John, and in New Jersey. And I knew that at some point, some of the judges would move faster than others or more aggressive. And as it turned out, it was actually really interesting because I was present. I said, well, these are the issues we're going to have, Judge. And then, like, I remember I was in North Dakota during that 5-day period at the beginning, because we filed them all at once. The judge, I said, defendants are, refusing to preserve evidence. And this judge in North Dakota said, "Oh, that's not good." It's like, what do you need, Mr. Cantor? I said, well, and we hadn't, no motions were filed. I said, I just don't want them to destroy any tires until we've had a chance to examine them. And this guy said, like, I take discovery very seriously. That's how cases get resolved. He's like, bam, it turns out they were getting, like, I don't know, 10,000 tires a week back. Some of them, not all were bad. So we had them all shipped to Arkansas.
Texarkana, right?
Texarkana.
Yeah.
To be examined by our experts. And so those same defense, that was just like, okay, this judge takes it real seriously. Maybe the next judge would have said, oh, that's too burdensome.
So the judge issued an order ordering Cooper Tire that they could not destroy any tires until we've had a chance to inspect them.
Right. So then they went to New Jersey, Marina Cordamus, and they said they wanted her to lift the order. And she was like, no, I'm not going to lift another judge's order. And she goes, anyhow, you shouldn't be destroying evidence. Turns out she was very sensitive to not destroying evidence. So then we're having some issues, and we're actually winning a lot of little things from different judges. And they're trying to get a federal court to shut us all down, and that wasn't working for them. And the federal judge was like, well, who used to be a state judge in Ohio, he kind of was sympathetic. And then we actually, during that case, private jet story. Well, I have two. But we got a special master involved, Francis McGovern, who I ended up teaching with afterwards. But at Duke, he came in and he had the idea that both sides should fly all the judges to Philadelphia, and that they all should sit at the same time and hear the same arguments, and then they could do whatever they wanted for their states, but at least they're talking, coordinating, and whatnot. I thought this was a great idea.
Because back then you couldn't put them all on a Zoom call.
Right.
They had to actually
be there physically. And it was like, and he's a student of law, and he was like, oh, this is historic. This is breakthrough stuff. And so it was supposed to be on a, I don't know, it's like a Monday or something. And that morning I was with my wife in the pool at our house, and she was pregnant with a second child. And she looked like a small offshore island, to be honest with you. And I was like, are you sure you're going to be okay? I said, just going to go away tonight. Tomorrow I'll be in court. I'll be back tomorrow night. She's like, I'm fine. Don't worry, whatever. So I go to the hotel across from the courthouse where we're going to have the hearing the next day. And sure enough, at 3 a.m, her girlfriend's calling me and she's like, she's going into labor.
Oh, no.
And, I was a little freaked out because, I was all about winning the next morning, And, but, look, if they can't understand about family and shit, I can't help them. So I called my pilot. I said, we got to go. We're going now, And so go to the airport, there by 4 o'clock. It's like, 2.5 hours, whatever, to, New Orleans, plus you get an hour, whatever. And I figured I could land before the hearing started and I would call in. I called McGovern. I said, look, I got to do this. I mean, and I got to tell you, I'm not that moral. I mean, I really thought, look, toughen up, baby. It's your second kid. I'm here. I got all these judges from around the country. This is my chance to pay for college and braces and everything,
Yeah.
you know, just, but I decided I should go home. And, but, you know, I was really thinking about what was the essential points I wanted to make. Like I would try to, so he said, you can call in, we'll put you on a speakerphone, which I knew was terrible compared to the guy on the other side.
That's in person.
Being there in person. And so I actually was like a few minutes late calling in, and they started the hearing without me. And the guy from the other side said, well, we should seal the record. And one of the judges, I think Marina, said, wait, for the first time in history, we're having judges from different states coming to hear an argument, and you want to turn this into a star chamber? Star chamber refers to secret judicial proceedings in England before the Magna Carta kind of stuff.
Got it.
And very offensive. Like no judge wants to run a star chamber, you know?
Yeah.
And he wouldn't stop talking about it. And like every judge is taking turns yelling at this guy. He's like a big defense lawyer from, I don't know, someplace, I think Chicago or whatnot. He was definitely not the A team or the B team on his firm. He was probably a C team guy. And because he wouldn't stop. And like, if you have a courtroom to yourself, get what you need, go home.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, don't dawdle. So, of course, in the middle of his rant, he hadn't even given his argument on the merits yet.
He's just talking about locking it all down.
Yeah. And he wouldn't take the hint from any judge to stop.
Yeah.
So then, you know, the phone rings and McGovern's got it. And he says, you know, Mr. Kenner's called in. And so, you know, I apologized. I said, look, I'm very sorry. My wife's in labor. I've only got a few minutes. I'm sorry I left. I know I was a big catalyst in trying to get you all there. But she said, even though she looked like an offshore island, not to worry about it. And turned out it was a lie. And no, I didn't say anything bad about her. But I just said, look, I'm really sorry about this. But I had met all of the judges personally on my travels.
Yeah.
Okay? So they kind of knew I wasn't, you know, a jerk for this, you know, just the sake of being a jerk or something. And Marina actually made a lot of nice comments about, you know, look, we understand you've only done this.
That's the New Jersey judge, Marina Cordemus.
Yeah, she was the what they call the MDL judge for New Jersey, mass tort judge for New Jersey. She was the first. She really made that position, and it's been very good for the efficiency of the system over time. So she made some nice comments, and I said, look, this is why we need what we need. And I guess in the course of flying back for 2 hours or 2.5 hours, I was like really honing.
You distilling it all down, knowing you were going to be on a speakerphone. And
Right. And so I did it maybe 7.5 minutes on 3 different matters. And I said, I'm sorry. I understand she's in labor and I've got to get to the hospital.
Yeah.
I said, we don't need any rebuttal. You've seen, we've read their brief, our brief. You know, if this guy brings up anything that hasn't been previously brought up, I would just like an opportunity to submit something in writing to the court.
Yeah.
And they were all like, fine, good luck, you know? So race to the hospital. and on a new land speed record. Actually, I was so distraught. My pilot was a good friend of mine, and so he drove me over there. And I get there, and she's still in labor. And I was like, what the hell? You know, I'd had another 15 minutes on the phone, you know? And I'd squandered it all. I had no idea how things had turned out. It turned out I won all 3 motions. And because this guy got back in about sealing the record, including everything I had said. And then he wanted to start arguing, and they're like, I think we're through here. And I don't know if they ever let him finish. Do you have anything to add to what you submitted? Because he had ticked them off so badly.
Yeah.
He was like so toned down. You've been in court. You see
got to
somebody,
read the audience and the judge.
and it's just like, what are you thinking?
Yeah.
You know, like he may have called me a jerk or something, and they're like, come on, he's not even in the room.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we're not going to let you call somebody a jerk in court, but damn it, do it when somebody's hearing could answer, you know. So I won there, and then they fired that guy. Remember, they got a new law firm involved.
Yeah.
Because I mean, he had lost spectacularly. I mean, it was like a biblical proportion loss, and so he got fired, which was. I mean, this guy was so bad. He was. So we were at a mediation.
I was at that mediation.
Oh,
I remember that story.
Yeah. Well, it was. So, you know, I'm sure most people have heard of the joke about the people on the two guys on the island, and you know, after a few years of telling the same jokes to each other, they would just say like, "Oh, two," and the guy's like, "Ah, it's hysterical," you know, or six, and that's just you know, and so the lawyer on the other side who got fired, we were there, and he would keep making the same speech, like over. Okay, so you were there, you make the same speech over. So I looked at the mediator. I said, "Let's call that two." Yeah. And he's like, and he got it right away, okay, because he's a normal human being. And this guy, it's like, you know, I object. You obviously have been talking about this outside my presence and blah blah blah. and then McGovern's trying to explain the joke to him about it's not the number, it's how you tell it. And this guy was like, he was so clueless. It was crazy. I mean, how some corporation would trust him with this important piece of litigation. But the jet was really helpful for getting around and for my two kids. I have two sons, and they're both healthy. They're both doing well. And we spend a lot of time together, and we have spent a lot of time together. Last thing about the jet paying for itself. So we're negotiating what turned out to be $1 billion plus settlement and all kinds of changes. You were part of that.
It was like valued at $3 billion, if I recall.
Right. And so I had flown into New York City. This was about a week before 9/11, because we reached an agreement at that visit. And then the following week was paperwork, and I sent Lily, I think, up to cover it, to do the paperwork, or Cindy, and they ended up, like, when they shut down the airspaces, they had to drive back and whatnot to Louisiana. But so we're parked at an FBO, which is a fixed base operation, which is like a garage for jets and airplanes. And I'm a pilot, by the way. I mean, part of my interest is I like to fly.
Yeah.
And I've flown a lot of different kind of planes that I did not own, but like a fighter jet and all. But in any event, so the chairman, the CEO of the company lands at the same FBO we're at. And the general counsel was already there. He had a different corporate plane. And his pilot said to him when he landed, he's like, you know, Canner's here, and he has a bigger airplane than you do. So the next day, the guy just folded like a cheap suit and settled. And I was like, okay, great. But I heard that story afterwards when I got to the FBO. And like, like the people who worked there were like, he wanted to see your plane to make sure it was bigger than his.
I remember we were at one mediation on that case, and I think I was a lawyer for 3 or 4 years, and I'm in the room kind of just assisting you and John Keefe, who we worked together at the time. And I'm sitting off to the side just observing. You know, you understand as a young lawyer to kind of keep your mouth shut and listen rather than, you know, talk when you're in a situation like that.
Good advice for an old lawyer, too. Go ahead.
And I remember at one point, you just started battling with them. It was probably 4 of us on our side, and there was probably 8 or 9 or 10 lawyers on their side of the table, and we were ordered to get together and go talk about resolving the tires piling up at Texarkana and several other plants because of the order from the judge. And I remember you start battling with them, and you just were like, F you and F you. And then some kid who's a young lawyer on their side. These are all high-end, skyscraper lawyers. And some
Senior partners.
Yeah, senior partners, whatever it is. And one of the younger kids speaks up, and you're like, "And who are you?" And that guy he got really scared. It's just, and I'm just sitting there like, "Holy crap! I didn't know this is how this works." And that always gave me inspiration, in my career, because a lot of times it's a David and Goliath thing, and we're often up against firms like that. And I always remember that. And the case ultimately, you ended up resolving it for a value, it wasn't $3 billion in cash, but with the benefits to the consumers and the cash and everything, it was valued by McGovern, and I think it was Francis McGovern and others at $3 billion.
And the judge.
Yeah.
The judge.
Yeah, and the judge. And it's fun.
Actually, it was more than one judge. I mean, Marina approved it. Everybody, all the other states approved it, and then the MDL judge approved it.
Yeah. And so people understand, there's really no substitute for hard work and everything. And I'll never forget. So what happens in these class action settlements is because it's on behalf of a large class of people, anyone that would benefit from the case or fall into the class has an opportunity to object to the settlement. And at that time, there was different law firms that would be like professional objectors, and they would just object to the settlement just to try to get a piece of the pie, so that
You'd give them money to go away.
Yeah. Sometimes it could be called a shakedown. And in order to be a lawyer objecting, you had to have a client. And one of the benefits of the settlement was an extended warranty or a warranty of the tires. So if you bought a Cooper tire, you could take your tire back and get a warranty for it. And that was a big cash value or a big value in the settlement. And the objectors were saying, the warranty's BS, that's not a real benefit to the class and all that stuff. And there was probably 20 lawyers on your side. And I remember that we were preparing for the hearing, and all the lawyers on our side had the papers of the objectors for weeks. We were reviewing them and doing them. And you're preparing, and you're the leader of this litigation with 20 other law firms, and you're diving through the papers, and lo and behold, one of the key objectors, because in order to be an objector, you had to prove that you fell within the class, meaning you had to prove that you bought a Cooper tire. And, it was kind of just like they would attach the receipt. I have standing to object because here's my receipt where I bought a Cooper tire. But no one's reading the receipts other than Allan Cantor, and these objectors are saying that the extended warranty part of this settlement is BS. But lo and behold, the key objector actually purchased the extended warranty on the tire that he bought. And that was, I mean, again, there was 20 law firms, God knows how many lawyers, and you were the only one that dove in and took the time to actually read the objector's papers and review the documents and see that they themselves bought an extended warranty when they're representing that or arguing that an extended warranty is BS.
Look, hard work's important, and people tend to shy away from hard work and detail sometimes, or they just take things for granted, where I'd rather, irritate my fellow workers by saying, have we double-checked this? Have we
Yes.
triple-checked this? And, for example, I'll give you, probably one of the biggest cases I ever did was the BP oil spill case. And the first thing
That's the one on the Gulf of Mexico?
yeah,
Where
where British Petroleum spilled all that oil, and this huge wave of oil came in. You got all the dead pelicans and stuff. So what happened was Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas sued. Why Texas sued? Some people say they never got any oil over there. And Florida never really got oil, but they got little tar balls that came up, which was nothing like being at ground zero, which was Louisiana. So we're at this meeting. It was kind of an interesting meeting. I told you I was a pilot. I flew my small plane over, and the Attorney General of the United States was there. He had a jet, Gulfstream, nice jet. Like I put my plane right next to it. You know, it's like a little four-seater. And we go to this meeting, and he's like, the United States is going to lead this litigation. We're going to take care of all of your problems. We're going to represent everybody. We're going to put together a team of experts. And, you know, my attorney general didn't even bother to go. He was like, Allan, you go do whatever you want to do. I was special assistant attorney general for that case. But all the other attorney generals were there. They wanted a photo op with the big AG and whatnot to show that they were doing something. My guy said, he was a good AG. He just said, go do something, you know, I don't need photo ops. I just need results, you know, and which is rare in politics, but was really well received by me. So he's like, we're taking it here, the experts, blah, 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 blah. So I go back to the governor and the attorney general and Garrett Graves, who is the trustee. When there's a natural resource damage thing, the governor usually appoints a trustee or acts as a trustee themselves. Garrett Graves is now a congressman, Republican congressman from Baton Rouge. We're there. And I just said, we cannot rely on the federal government to help us. You know, I said, that would be cheaper, that would be easier. But at the end of the day, they're going to turn around and say, we're ready to settle. And if you don't want to settle, good luck. And what are we going to have? So at that meeting, we all agreed we were going to prepare our own cases if the U.S. government did. We would cooperate with them, but we would have our shadow case going forward. And they knew about it. And actually, at the end, before the end, of course, they come back with what I call a bad settlement number. And it was in the billions, but it was not enough.
It was massive pollution.
Yeah. And so they said, all the states were told by the feds, you're going to take this. And they were like, oh, it's found money, because they didn't really have the damages we did. We said, look, we don't have any objection to you guys settling, but we're not settling. They're like, well, we have the experts. And then I said, I think I got better experts than you, so, you know, F you. To the Deputy Attorney General of the United States. But I got out of the building alive, so it was not too bad. And you know, in the end, so that fell apart, and everybody blamed us. All the other states were blaming us for ruining the settlement. We got them over twice as much, like 2 years later, 2.5 years later.
A lot more litigation.
Yeah, and a lot of expert work. I mean, figuring out damages was really tough. And it's not like if you have a oil destroying wetlands, how do you restore wetlands? You can't restore it right there. So then you're going to have to like start creating new wetlands in other areas of the state. Because, I mean, fishing is a big industry for us, tourism, but so we had like all these ecologists trying to figure out different projects and costs and whatnot. And we ended up getting like, Louisiana got maybe 3 times what was offered the first time, and everybody else got maybe twice what was offered. And it was only because we were prepared and we weren't trusting the federal government to do everything. We understood at that time that if you do the work, it should pay off. And it's amazing because by the very end, before the settlement, the feds were asking if they could jointly retain some of our experts, which I refused. But I said, well, if we try the case together, they'll be there and you can have access to them. A lot of litigation, at least the high stakes stuff, it's about imposing your will on reality. I mean, you're there representing a state. The worst oil spill in history has happened. Okay, other states are telling you what to do. The federal government's telling you what to do. And you have to sit there and really think about it, talk to your client, come up with a vision of what you're going to do with that case. And then, you anticipate the naysayers. It was no surprise in Cooper Tire when, Gerald Clark tells me, oh, Allan, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I never said that at that age.
No, you thought about it.
I thought about it, though,
No, but it is about figuring out how to get things done.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of people, it's to me, the two things that are fundamental is you're going to have to work hard if you want to make money as a lawyer, and two, you can't cut any corners. You got to be honorable. You got to take ethics seriously. I guess that's why I still don't advertise. I'm not saying it's unethical.
Yeah.
I just, you know, I don't understand. I find it sometimes hard to understand, you know, people who are mismanaging a lot of files.
Yeah.
You know, like I actually one of the things I do that's not contingent fee is we do some work for what are called litigation funders. We don't use we self-fund, but litigation funders are basically, we'll go to a lawyer who's got a bunch of cases and say, we'll give you money and you give us a return for it. And, you know, I think the client has to consent and all that. And in some cases, the funder just does the deal with the client, whatever. But before they spend their money, the funders do what's called due diligence.
Right.
So because of my age and reputation for understanding law, we get to look at a lot of files of possible cases, which has been remarkably interesting for me. I remember, you probably have heard that, you know, there's a lot of forest fires in America, and a lot of litigation about that when people's homes burn down and whatnot. Some of it's climate change, but some of it's also, you know, negligence of these power companies with their lines. And I remember they said, oh, this guy, we're going to fund him. He has like 1,000 cases. You know, I looked him up. He's like a solo practitioner with just a secretary. And I'm like, are you sure he's got 1,000 cases? And are you sure when things get close to settling, he's going to end up with 1,000 files, or are they all going to bolt someplace else? And it's something that the funders never really thought about.
Right.
I mean, it's a little thing, but you know, you got to, if you want to bend reality to your will in the name of justice, you really do have to put in the time and do it the right way.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's, you know, you tell young lawyers sometimes, you know, you really got to work on this, and you got to spend a few years learning your craft, right? Big skill difference between your second year of practice
That's
and
for sure.
your 10th year of practice.
Yeah.
You know, it's like people look at you like you're from, you know, crazy land or something. Like, what do you mean learn my craft? I went to law school. You know, I got good grades.
Yeah. Yeah, and on these contingency cases, the funding part is, you know, when you take on a case on contingency where you only get paid if you win, also the law firm's putting the cash out on the cases. And like on the BP case, what was the because you got to pay for all these experts, and it's like, what were the expenses on something
actually,
like that?
I wanted that case for 5% of the take, which turned out after a number of years to be like 10 billion. The legislature, though, in its wisdom, says we're going to pay you hourly, because, and I testified in front of the legislature. I said, look, if it was me, I wouldn't give a contingent fee contract on this. I said it could be, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars for something you could buy for $10-15 million, you know? And so I was honest. I didn't try to, a lot of people think I was foolish that I didn't insist on the contingency because they'd already decided that I was the guy. In 2002 in New Jersey, I was the first lawyer to start bringing natural resource damage cases.
Yeah, I want to ask you about them.
So that gave me a leg up on just about any competition when this happened. And, you know, I was clearly going to get it.
Yeah.
The question was I going to hardball them? But, you know, it was my state. It was a legacy. I mean, you know, I didn't feel like it was right to put my self-interest first. You have to tell your client the truth. And the truth is, in that situation, if you've got the taxing authority and you can pay for it, you should pay for it.
And just so everyone understands, So the state of Louisiana retained you to represent them against British Petroleum for that spill, and you're talking about are you going to represent them on a contingency where you'll take about 5% of the recovery? Ordinarily, contingency cases are anywhere from, generally speaking, a third.
Yeah, but when you're talking billions,
it's the percentage has to be less.
right.
And you essentially encourage them to just pay me by the hour, although it'll be a lot less than the contingency. You felt that was the right thing.
Yeah, I think that anybody I've ever represented will say that I've been very honest or volunteered too much information. Like I could have said nothing.
Right.
I could have said, who knows what will happen if it
Yeah.
goes hourly. But I know my abilities, and there's no way I wasn't going to get him a few $1 billion,
Yeah.
you know? And it was like the ultimate, absolute liability case
Disaster.
of all time.
Yeah.
And, I feel like in the long run, for reputational reasons, honesty is the best policy. For example, Mississippi once interviewed me, the Attorney General of Mississippi, for a different case. And
Is that Hood?
that was Jim Hood. Yeah,
Jim Hood.
He's a
Okay.
good friend of mine. He's no longer the AG, but he's
Yeah.
a great guy. And he said, subsequently, to another Attorney General who he was introducing me to, he says, Allan, he says, he's totally honest. He says, you never have to worry about this guy. And the guy says, what do you mean? He said, I wanted to give him a case and that he could have made a lot of money on. And he told me, why are you sending this out? Pick up the phone, call this guy,
Right.
tell him this, tell him you're going to get me to do the job and see if he pays you.
Yeah.
And the guy did pay him. And I didn't get anything. I was offered seats at a Ole Miss football game, but that's another story. No, you just have to. You got to play it straight. And the thing was, like the other AGs, they have the reputational thing. They're like, okay, he's a straight shooter.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when you're asking somebody to do a high risk case, your credibility really matters.
We'll take a break. One thing, let me just say one thing. When I was going through the Vanderbilt estate in Rhode Island, and the Vanderbilts and gazillions of dollars back in the day, I remember I stopped and I looked around and I said, you know what, he couldn't take a dime of it with him. So there's some things are more important than that for sure, as you just demonstrated. Cool.